Is it more difficult now than ever before to increase your chess rating? That and more is coming up. Welcome to episode 14 of The Chess Angle. And I just want to say up front, I really appreciate all of you who are listening. This started out a little bit as a pandemic experiment. And of course, why not start a podcast in the middle of a pandemic when everyone else is doing it and it's so cliche and it's already getting saturated? Why not, right? But as it turned out, the results are much better than I anticipated. I was taking a peek at the analytics for this podcast, and the numbers are very impressive. And that's because of all of you. And I really appreciate it because I know you're busy and you have other commitments. So it means a lot that you're listening. And technically, we are a statistically above average podcast. That's what the numbers say. So I'm very grateful. I appreciate it. And it's great to see that so many people are interested in chess and tournaments at the amateur level. And I really appreciate all of your support. It's been fantastic. So I'm going to be sharing some loosely connected ideas about rating and chess improvement. And I'm referring mainly to your OTB or over the board rating for live events, for live US chess events. I'm not so much talking about your online rating, which is a little bit of a different thing. That's kind of a separate discussion. But really, again, your OTB, your over the board rating. So I'm going to share some ideas and some theories, maybe go down a few rabbit holes, but it's all going to tie in. And it's some interesting topics. A lot of this is anecdotal. A lot of this stuff, maybe I read or I spoke to other players about. So this is coming from experience. These aren't things I'm pulling out of thin air. So the first idea or concept is the idea of chess experts who have achieved a rating of 2,000, of them not continuing playing at the club level once they earned their expert title. So what I mean by that is there's a belief that once you achieve a rating of about 2,000 USCF, that from a ratings standpoint, we're not talking about, just the love of the game and that whole thing, but from a ratings standpoint, it can be argued that it really makes no sense to play at the club level anymore. And let me explain the math behind that. So at the club level, most players are lower rated. That's where we get the term club player. And Class C, which is 1,400 to 1,599, that's your quote unquote average player. Okay. And a lot of players are rated lower. You'll have a few players on, sort of the right side of the bell curve, 17, 18, 1900, maybe a few experts. Usually you don't get too many masters or title players. Usually once you're above 2,000, you're playing in major events or at events with just, titled players or much higher rated players, because most 22, 2,300 players, they don't want to be playing against 1,400 competition. But what happens is at the club level, if you're rated 2,000, the vast majority of your competition is going to be rated lower than you, which means when you win a game, you're only going to get a few rating points. But if you lose a game, you're going to lose a significant amount of rating points, and it may take you a while to get that back. So let's say you're a 2,000 player or a 2,100 player, and you have a bad night against a 1,500 player, you might lose 30 points. But because if you had won, you would only get maybe 5 points or so, something like that. You now have to win all these games to get it back. So in a sense, once you have an expert rating at the club level, you're pretty much playing just to preserve your existing rating. You follow the math, because if you win, you're only gaining a few points. But if you lose or even draw, you're losing a lot of points. So it doesn't make sense, mathematically. So once you reach 2,000, I think you have to make a decision. Do I still want to play at the club level where it's going to be harder to improve, or do I want to now shoot for 2200? And, in which case you would need to play in higher level events. And I've spoken to experts and masters about this, and they agree. In fact, I know offhand at least 2 or 3 2000, rated players, expert players, who don't play in clubs anymore for that reason, just because mathematically it doesn't make sense. Now, you can argue the other side. There's the love of the game, and you want to play chess, and you want to stay active, and I get that. But again, from a ratings standpoint, it really doesn't make sense mathematically. Okay, and I once knew an IM who actually said that. Okay, that once you achieve a certain level, playing it at the club level doesn't really make sense anymore. So that's something to think about, and that can be argued, but I think it's true, and I know quite a few players, once they hit 2000, they're kind of stuck. They keep bouncing back and forth between the same like 20, 30, 40, 50 point range. They keep bouncing back and forth when they remain at the club level. Okay, I think if you're 12, 13, 14, 1500 around there, that's when you should be playing at the club level. But once you reach 2000, I think it's a valid argument that from a ratings standpoint, it doesn't make too much sense to play at the club anymore. It's just a theory. You might call that nonsense, but I think it's an interesting sort of thought experiment, to talk about with other chess players. So something I just wanted to share there. Now, let me go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. There is a fascinating book that I'm about a third of the way through. It's called The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova. You may have heard of it. It was a New York Times bestseller. And like I said, I'm a third of a way through it. I can't wait to finish it. There's a link in the show notes in the episode description if you're interested. The reason I'm mentioning this is there is a bit of a tie-in with poker and chess. I know that's a little bit overused, but if you'll just indulge me. What it's about, Maria Konnikova, and I'm just going to kind of set it up for you. I'm not going to really spoil anything because this is in the blurb. If you go to buy the book or you look at the back cover, she's a writer and she was down on her luck and she was very interested in the idea of luck and chance versus skill and what you can control and you can't control. So she started doing some research and she discovered this famous book on game theory where the author basically says that life is pretty much like poker, that as far as game theory, the one game that resembles life the most is poker, because ultimately every day you're making decisions with imperfect or incomplete information, which is pretty much what poker is. And I forget the name of the book. It's mentioned in the beginning, but that's basically the concept. So she decides, okay, so to answer this question about luck and skill and that whole interplay, she decides as a writer, she's a journalist, she wants to learn more about poker. So what she does is she approaches Erik Seidel, who's one of the greats, and explains her situation, and she convinces him to take her on as a student and to help her out. And so, yeah, and again, this is all in the first part of the book. I'm only going to kind of just set it up for you. So basically, what was interesting, he sort of delegates. He basically tells her, okay, before I take you on, because again, she knows nothing about the game. She's a rank beginner. He goes, I want you to speak to Dan Harrington. Now, those of you who know poker know that Dan Harrington is one of the greats. He goes, I want you to meet with Dan Harrington and, more importantly, read his books. Now, for those of you who don't know poker, Dan Harrington wrote a series of books. I think it's a 3-part series or maybe 2 parts. I'm not sure, but it's called Harrington on Hold'em, I believe. They're classic texts in learning tournament poker, sort of the Bible of tournament poker, or at least it's one of the most respected book series. So Erik Seidel tells her, okay, before I take you on, you need to meet with Dan and you need to read these books first. So basically, he wants her to have at least some type of foundation before he takes her on. So I'm kind of reminded of a grandmaster who won't take on a student, unless they at least know how the pieces move and know some, basic checkmate patterns and tactics, things of that nature. And he also wants her to start playing online just to kind of get a feel for it, because he's telling her you need to have experience as well. So she goes out and she reads the Harrington books, cover to cover, writing in the margins, highlighting like obsessively. And she meets with Dan Harrington. They speak. He gives her some advice. And then she starts playing online. And, she's having a little trouble, doesn't know what she's doing. She talks about this hand that she misplayed. And then she speaks to Erik Seidel about it, tells her what he did wrong. And that's pretty much where I'm up to right now. But of course, and I'm not spoiling anything because this is how the book's been promoted. She ends up going from wanting to just learn about poker and how it relates to life as a journalist to becoming a strong player herself, winning like thousands of dollars. And this is all within a year's time. It's actually quite remarkable. I'm very curious to finish it and see how it ends. I mean, we know how it ends, but the journey is what I'm curious about. What does this have to do with chess? The point is, and the reason I'm bringing it up, with the internet and technology, games like chess, poker, and backgammon can be learned very quickly. And if you have the drive and the desire, and you're a reasonably intelligent person, you can become a competent player pretty quickly. I've heard poker professionals in interviews say that, with the internet and online poker, that it's easy to become a competent player pretty fast. And I think the same thing is true for chess. And one of the comments that Erik Seidel makes to Konnikova is that you can now get hours and hours of hands in online, or really more hands in online than you could in a live situation. And so you're learning faster, because remember, these poker greats before the internet, it was hours and hours of grinding it out in casinos and card clubs before anyone knew who they were, and that they would make their mistakes and they would learn from them. But they had to do that in a live situation, spending hours and hours, where you can cut that in half or even more by doing it online, because you're getting in so many more hands. And this is what she did. And again, I'm curious to read the rest of the story, but the point is, because of the internet play and all the books and strategy that is available now, all of the learning tools, she became pretty much a professional poker player in about a year's time, which is quite remarkable. And I'm mentioning this again because you're seeing something similar with chess, where people are playing online and using online resources and becoming decent players pretty fast. But as a side note, it's called The Biggest Bluff by Maria Konnikova. All right, I have the information in the episode notes. It's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I'm a third of the way through, like I said, and I can't wait to finish it. But I think you should check it out, because as far as the message of just learning and improving, there's a lot of things in there. So I highly recommend it. In that book, just continuing, she mentions the 10,000 hour rule that was made famous by Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers, which is also another fantastic book. I think I put a link for that as well. If you're not familiar with Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell basically discusses how success is not so much about talent and hard work, but also the circumstances you're in. Certain people just happen to be in a circumstance that help them succeed rather than just their talent alone. He doesn't bash talent, not at all. He just shows how it was given a boost by the specific circumstances that people were in. I won't get into too much detail, but Outliers is fascinating. But the reason I mentioned the 10,000 hours rule is that Konnikova states in the book, and I kind of knew this before I read it because I'm into kind of social psychology, the 10,000 hour rule, which, by the way, is the idea that if you want to become an expert at something, you have to put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. That's been debunked a little bit, or at least the way Malcolm Gladwell presented it has been sort of challenged what they're finding is that that's only true for certain disciplines. And even then, it's not necessarily 10,000 hours. For many people, it can be less. There are people who put in more hours but are less successful. That's just sort of an approximation. So it was presented a little too, I guess, literally by Gladwell. So if you're interested in researching that, you'll see that they came out with some other studies and other theories that sort of challenge that. And Konikovi even says that in the book. I mean, think about all the people we know in that situation. There might be some people who put in 5,000 hours and they become more successful than someone who put in 10,000 hours. But I'm mentioning outliers because she mentions it in the book, and you may have heard that whole 10,000 hour rule. But there's a little more to the story than Gladwell presents, and that came out, years after the book was published. So something interesting there. Now, the main point of this episode is really to talk about how the internet has been a complete game changer for chess, literally. You can gain a tremendous amount of experience very quickly, kind of like Konnikova did playing online poker. And there's a lot of good players out there as a result now. I mean, I'm seeing it at my club. I'm seeing it even online. If you play online regularly and you do so responsibly and you're also studying, I mean, you can become a decent player pretty quickly. And not only that, with these online sites like chess.com, not only can you play online, but you can analyze your game with a chess engine immediately using that same platform. So like you could play a 5-minute blitz game on chess.com. As soon as it's over, you click a button and you can analyze it right there. Whereas back in the day, you would have to play a live game with a chessboard and then review it with a strong teacher or use a computer if they even had them back then, depending on how far back you go. But you get the idea. Now you can just sit with a laptop and it's all there. And you don't have to crack open a book and set up the pieces. Everything's on the computer now. So I see it at the club and even online, the players are getting stronger. And it's because they're able to get so much experience from the internet. Now, internet chess is nothing like playing live chess, but it still helps. And I've accepted that more than I have in the past. In the past, I've criticized online chess, but as I'm doing it a little bit more myself and seeing what's going on, people are getting better because you're just able to gain a lot of experience. What used to take months or weeks now takes hours. And the quote unquote lower rated players, they seem to be stronger than lower rated players in the past. Now, I'm not basing this on any formal study. This is just on my experience, seeing it myself, on anecdotal evidence, talking with others, just reading articles from reputable writers about it. It's very competitive now. Like these lower rated players, I put that word in quotes because, some of these lower rated players are doing really well. They seem to have outstanding board sense and, they're not afraid to, let's say, have their pawns doubled because they know it controls a square. Like a lot of advanced players know, or most advanced players know, that doubled pawns, for example, aren't always bad because they control squares and they open up files. And the idea is that, well, beginners think all doubled pawns are bad, and so they avoid them. But I'm not seeing that. Like I'm seeing players, beginners, low-rated players who will accept the doubled pawns and deliberately, they understand what's happening and that they're going to get some square control as a result. That's just one example. I'm also seeing more patient positional play from beginners. Usually beginning chess players, especially younger ones, and I'm kind of stereotyping here, everything is attack, attack, attack. They just play pure offense. It's kind of like beginning poker players, right? The reason the most bad poker players are bad is because they only think offensively. They just want to bet and raise and go to the end. They don't put any thought into what the opponent might have. And they chase draws without the proper odds. And again, I'm kind of getting into poker again, but there is a definite relationship with chess. That's why I'm mentioning it. But these, beginning chess players or lower rated players, they're much stronger than they were in the past. And I see it at my club in person, where we have this new crop of players who are playing online, and they're doing really well, even over the board. It's really something. I spoke about this several times in other episodes. As a general statement, I do believe it's harder to get your rating up nowadays because of the internet and the resources that are available. You also have people, myself included, who are playing system openings more, and we know a lot more about defense, and not everything is like swashbuckling attacks and gambits now. But I do think it's trickier to get your rating up now for that reason. There's just a lot more resources. People can become competent players very quickly, and the internet has really changed the game. My advice for improvement, now I'm oversimplifying, but what I tell people, I go first and foremost, read The Amateur's Mind by Jeremy Silman. You've heard me recommend that before. It's sort of like what Eric Seidel told Konnikova in The Biggest Bluff, read the Harrington books first before you come to me. That's what I would tell people. Read The Amateur's Mind. Like if an adult beginner came to me who didn't know much about the game for lessons, I'm not really taking students now, but when I was, teaching adult beginners, I would say, fine, but you need to read The Amateur's Mind, and that would give them a foundation. And everybody comes back to me and tells me how great that book was. I mean, I have yet to have one person tell me they didn't like it. So I would say read The Amateur's Mind as your foundation. And again, I'm giving you sort of the Cliff Notes version here. Then for openings, use the same repertoire. You know that's my philosophy. So that way there's no surprises. Just keep playing the same openings so you get used to the positions that you'll see. System openings are always good, or thematic openings where the idea is more about what you're trying to achieve and where the pieces go rather than having to memorize specific moves. And then the other thing is for tactics and the end game, things of that nature, I would use the interactive lessons on chess.com or just check out some of the videos. The instruction is fantastic. Again, and these are all reasons why the players nowadays are so good, because you could just check out some of these videos and they're outstanding. Most of them are really, really good. There's videos on YouTube also. And as long as it's, from a reputable person, most of them are pretty good, I have to say. And then, of course, to just play as much as possible, which you can do with online chess now, between your computer and your phone. So that would be my advice. That's just a digested sort of Reader's Digest version, so to speak. But I just wanted to share my thoughts about chess improvement in this day and age. And it's definitely more challenging. It's more competitive. And because of the internet, players can get strong pretty fast, or at least become competent players much more quickly than they could in the past. Again, any of the books I mentioned are linked below if you want to check them out. And as always, I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.